The Renaissance was a vast cultural, artistic, scientific, and philosophical movement that transformed Europe between the 15th and 16th centuries. Born in Italy, it soon spread to other countries, leaving a profound mark on France. Although the French Renaissance began somewhat later than the Italian, it flourished intensely, giving rise to a period of intellectual and aesthetic splendor that would set the course of modern French thought. The Renaissance arrived in France at the end of the 15th century, favored by a series of historical factors. One of the most important was the invasion of Italy by Charles VIII of France in 1494, which sparked the Italian Wars. These military campaigns allowed the French to come into direct contact with Italian Renaissance art, architecture, and thought. Soldiers, nobles, and artists returned from Italy fascinated by what they had seen. Cities replete with frescoes, palaces with classical columns, marble sculptures reminiscent of the ancient gods, and a new way of understanding humankind. French monarchs played an essential role in promoting the Renaissance. From Francis I, 1515 to 1547, to his successors, the monarchy acted as the principal patron of artists, writers, and architects. Francis I, in particular, is considered the king of the French Renaissance for his enthusiasm for art and his staunch support of humanist culture. The French Renaissance was characterized by a fusion of medieval Gothic traditions and new classical forms brought from Italy. Unlike the Italian Renaissance, which emerged from an urban and commercial tradition, in France the movement was more closely linked to the court and the nobility. Renaissance art, literature, and architecture developed primarily around the castles of the Loire Valley and the cities linked to the royal administration. One of the key aspects of the French Renaissance was humanism, an intellectual movement that placed the human person at the center of philosophical and scientific reflection. French humanists, inspired by classical Greco-Latin texts, sought an education based on reason, the study of ancient languages, history, rhetoric, and morality. This represented a profound departure from medieval scholastic teaching, which focused on theology. In architecture, the French Renaissance adopted classical elements such as columns, pediments, and symmetry, but also maintained traditional forms such as towers, pitched roofs, and Gothic ornamentation. Iconic examples are the Loire castles of Chambord, Chenonceau, and Blois, which demonstrate a synthesis of Italian innovation and French aesthetics. Sculpture and painting also flourished, although less intensely than in Italy. Italian artists such as Rosso Fiorentino, Primatico, and Benvenuto Cellini were invited to work in France, especially at the School of Fontainebleau, where a refined decorative style developed that would influence French art for decades. Renaissance literature in France reached a remarkable level, with authors who embraced humanist ideas and renewed the language and artistic expression. One of the main representatives was François Rabelais, author of Gargantua and Pantagruel, a satirical work that combines classical scholarship with irreverent and critical humor. Rabelais celebrated freedom of thought and the integral education of man, central elements of humanism. The French Renaissance was also a time of scientific advancement and pedagogical renewal. New universities were founded, and institutions such as the College de France were established in 1530, promoted by Francis I, with the aim of promoting the free study of knowledge, independent of the church. In medicine, mathematics, and cartography, France began to excel, although the most revolutionary advances still came from Italy and, to a lesser extent, the Netherlands. Even so, the idea of knowledge as a tool of power and progress spread rapidly. Although the French Renaissance was a time of cultural splendor, it also coincided with deep religious tensions. The spread of the reformist thought of Luther and Calvin caused divisions in the kingdom, which would later lead to the wars of religion. In this context, French Christian humanism sought to reconcile faith and reason, with prominent figures such as William Bude and Jacques Lefebvre d'Etaples. The Renaissance profoundly transformed French culture. It introduced a new vision of humanity, one that was more rational, autonomous, and critical. It also strengthened the role of the French language as a language of culture, science, and diplomacy, which would be key in subsequent centuries. On an artistic level, it left an architectural and literary legacy that still fascinates scholars and visitors today. The Renaissance in France was not only an importation of Italian models, but creative adaptation that integrated national tradition with modern values. It was a time of splendor, but also of contradictions, during which many of the ideas that would shape 18th century Enlightenment thought were sown. If you want to know other interesting stories, you can follow my YouTube channel, Frank Fernandez Astoria.